For decades, Europe built its entire economic security on a single, fragile assumption that open markets would always protect its interests. That assumption just broke. What began as quiet economic anxiety has escalated into a full-scale, silent trade war, and the consequences are starting to reshape the entire global economy.
The vulnerability driving this conflict is mathematically impossible to ignore. $360 billion. That is the massive, crippling trade deficit Europe currently holds with China. This isn't just an imbalance on a spreadsheet. It is a direct, continuous transfer of wealth outward, slowly hollowing out the very manufacturing base that once defined European power.
And the panic spreading through Brussels right now stems from a very dark historical precedent. Analysts are calling it China Shock 2.0. Over the last 25 years, America watched its local industries collapse under a targeted flood of heavily subsidized foreign goods. Europe is looking at that exact devastation across the Atlantic and realizing they are standing directly in the path of the same threat.
This extreme exposure is the result of a deep systemic mismatch. Europe is still trying to play by the rules of an open, free trade illusion, but they are competing against the reality of state capitalism. When a foreign firm receives massive government subsidies, allowing them to sell products far below the actual cost of production, European companies operating in a purely open market simply can't survive.
Stopping that collapse requires a total reversal of policy. In a truly unprecedented move, Europe is abandoning its traditional free trade posture to build a massive protectionist fortress around its economy. They are drafting a new survival manual, known as the Made in Europe Initiative, designed to forcefully shield local industry from being completely wiped out. Activating this defense requires aggressive market intervention on three fronts. Europe is simultaneously deploying massive industrial subsidies to their own firms while enforcing strict new regulations that restrict foreign companies from accessing their market. But the core of this defense is a mandate on local content. The message to the world is now absolute. If you want to sell in Europe, you have to build in Europe.
The sheer scale of these mandates changes everything. To avoid punishing tariffs, foreign manufacturers will soon be forced to source 40 to 60% of their components directly from European soil. If a foreign electric vehicle rolls off an assembly line, up to half of its parts must be local. This is a forced, aggressive relocation of global supply chains. And Europe is drawing a hard line around exactly which industries this applies to. This isn't about protecting consumer goods, it's about securing the hardware of the future, things like advanced batteries, semiconductors, and green technology. Europe is desperately trying to ring-fence these specific sectors to prevent a total reliance on external powers in the coming decades.
But this European defense strategy creates an immediate, existential crisis for Beijing. It directly threatens China's core economic engine. The Chinese growth model relies entirely on export-led manufacturing and constant access to wealthy consumer markets. If Europe successfully closes its doors, China's massive manufacturing sector faces a severe structural threat. Beijing is not absorbing this quietly. What began as a localized European policy shift has instantly transformed into a high-stakes global standoff. China has issued direct warnings to the European Union regarding this protectionist plan, making it very clear that any attempt to block their market access will be met with immediate and calculated countermeasures.
And China's leverage in this standoff is immense. While they can easily slap punishing tariffs on European luxury goods or block agricultural exports, the real threat is hidden much deeper in the supply chain. Beijing controls the processing of rare earth minerals. They have the ability to effectively choke off the exact raw materials Europe desperately needs to build the green tech it's trying to protect.
The implications of this standoff extend far beyond Brussels and Beijing. This dispute essentially marks the end of hyperglobalization. The era of seamless, borderless trade is over. The open world market is being replaced by high walls and deep economic suspicions, catching every multinational corporation on Earth in the crossfire.
Recognizing this new reality, global corporations are fleeing the conflict zones, triggering a massive reconfiguration of global trade. The map is rapidly splitting into distinct blocks. You have the highly regulated Western bloc and the state-backed China-centric bloc. But crucially, a third layer is emerging: the new hubs. Countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India are stepping up as the world's new supply chain absorbers.
This massive global fracturing creates a historic, strategic opening for India. As China is slowly pushed out of the European market, a massive manufacturing void is opening up. India is perfectly positioned to step directly into that exact space, capturing the immense demand of one of the world's wealthiest consumer bases.
The groundwork for this expansion is already moving into place. The European Union and India are actively navigating new, massive trade frameworks. Because India has the scale, the growing infrastructure, and the specific capacity in sectors like textiles, consumer electronics, and auto components, it can deeply embed itself into these relocating European supply chains.
But this global transition comes with a heavy cost. The world is balancing an immediate threat against a long-term strategic opportunity. Restricting cheap Chinese goods guarantees short-term global inflation and supply chain chaos. Prices are going to rise. However, for emerging industrial hubs, absorbing that short-term pain is simply the necessary cost of securing long-term manufacturing dominance.
The reality is that economics and technology have fundamentally evolved. They are no longer just mechanisms for mutually beneficial trade. We have fully entered the era of geoeconomics. Tariffs, supply chains, and critical minerals are now the primary weapons of global leverage. Nations are actively using market access to cripple rivals and secure their own survival.
The safety nets of the past 30 years are gone. When trade routes become battle lines and supply chains become actual weapons of statecraft, the entire global order shifts. As the old economic system collapses under the weight of this silent war, the ultimate question remains: who will step into the void, and who will actually control the markets of the future?